Good morning, all. Welcome to the press, to this news conference. Welcome, fellow commissioners, Hal, Ramon, Corey. Welcome, Mrs. Angela Taylor, Supervisor of Elections. Before we get into the press conference, I wish you all present here a happy, healthy, and prosperous 2022 and beyond. And I'm sure that you all wish the same for me, and I thank you very much. So that the purpose, I'm sorry to call you guys out. Well, I suppose we set it, but I'm sorry to set this conference at 9:30 this morning. But as you all know, time is short. As I've said before, this election is 4 days. The period between the issue of the writs and the polling day is 4 days shorter than the last election that we had, last general election. So, and we have a number of bank holidays in between, as you know, so time is short. Today, for instance, we have a number of training sessions set. So we have to get on with that work as well. But almost a week has gone since, well, the writs were issued on Monday last. A number of things have happened, you know, with the press and not the press, brass tacks and this and that. A number of issues have arisen. Some of those have gone away. Hopefully all have gone away, but we just thought that we would ask the supervisor this morning to appear for elections and to answer any general questions that you guys, that any of the press may have in relation to what has taken place during the week, what is to come next week, so that basically we can allay fears, and sometimes too, you know, you ask questions that perhaps sometimes we don't have the answers to, but we would have to give it further thought. So it's a two-way process, really. So that I would like now to turn over to Mrs. Angela Taylor, our Supervisor of Elections. I know she's had little sleep. And Mrs. Taylor, are you awake this morning? Right. As you know, since the writ was called on Monday afternoon, one of the things is that we had the air conditioning system in the EBC building, if I may call it the EBC building for the time being, in Warrens. We had those air conditioners moved, so they now turn off at 2 o'clock in the morning. And you can rest assured that most staff, most people at the EBC work until 11. Some who have other things to do work until 1:30, 2. So I know Mrs. Taylor and her staff have been working overtime. So there we are. Mrs. Taylor, over to you.
Good morning, Barbados. And like the chair, I wish everyone a happy new year. I wish to just inform that our election preparations are on point. We here at the EBC, we start to prepare for general elections 2.5 years after the last one. So we had already started our preparations, and we have just accelerated. I can assure you that our team of election workers are in place. The list of returning officers and election clerks would have been published yesterday. So that is available for all to see. We are, as Chairman said, we are doing the training of that cadre, the returning officers and election clerks today. And we are ready for nomination day. We have a team of persons working this weekend, and we will have all the bags packed with all the supplies needed for the candidates to be nominated at the centers. The list of nomination centers has also been published. We are going to, the only difference between this elections or preparations for this general election and previous ones is the fact that we are in a COVID-19 situation. and we have taken a number of steps and measures to ensure that we comply with the COVID-19 protocols. As a matter of fact, the COVID-19 unit has developed a document of the protocols that we will be following for every election activity. That includes the EBC meetings with the political parties, the media. It includes what we do on nomination day, on special polling day, on general polling day, at the night of the count. And it even includes information for the conduct of political meetings and other political activities. So we do have the protocols before us, and we will be training our staff to be familiar with everything that they have to put in place. We also have on this occasion, a separate team for COVID-19 matters, so that we have enough persons at polling stations to take the temperatures, to sanitize the hands of voters, to ensure that voters are social distancing, to sanitize the polling booth after persons have voted. We will be training that staff as well, but we do wish to assure the public that we have made every provision for ensuring that the COVID-19 protocols are complied with. One of the things that we have also done is that we've had a look at the number of electors to attend to every polling station, and we have reduced as far as possible the numbers so that we have fewer persons attending each polling station. What is the norm on a polling day is that persons would visit the polling station to cast their vote, primarily in the morning before they go to work, or on afternoons, in the late evenings when they come off from work. What we want to encourage this time around is that persons utilize their lunch hours to come out during the day, so we do not have too many in the morning and too many in the evening. What we also would like to say is those persons who do not have to go to work, if you can come out to the polling station more in the middle of the day and leave the morning and the evening for those persons who have to vote during those times, who absolutely cannot get away from work during a lunch hour, we would appreciate it very much. Chair, is there anything else we should be saying to our public?
Well, I think Mrs. Taylor, that let me apologize to Mr. Chapman, Ronald Chapman, who I did not say good morning to before. And just to draw to the attention of all that we have Mr. Chapman here with us. He's working, he's looking over our shoulder, so to speak, making sure that we toe the line. And the only other thing, Mrs. Taylor, was that, as you know, we had a meeting yesterday afternoon with the political parties, and that I would say it went very well. So other than that, that's all I think there is to say.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ian. We now have our Deputy Supervisor of Elections with us, Mr. Ian Brown.
Maybe I should explain that because we're having the training at the gymnasium here this morning, I had to bring some stuff to the gymnasium, so it would have been like difficult to get into the office on time for this. So I am joining from the gymnasium.
As expected, Ian.
Chair, if we can open up to the questions of the media at this point in time.
Certainly.
Good morning. Carrie Gooding from Outlook News. The first question I have is with regards to persons who would have tested positive for COVID. Are we facilitating their testing at facilities and in home isolation?
Mr. Chapman, would you wish to respond to this question, please?
Hi, good morning. So if I understand the question, you're asking if there would be testing sites at the polling stations or nomination stations and so on. The answer to that is no.
No, that's not the question. Sorry.
Okay.
The question is, will there be facilities for persons who are in isolation in terms of at the facilities? Will they be allowed to vote? And then in terms of those who are in home isolation, will we be doing mail-in votes, or will somebody be going in to collect their votes? How do positive persons get to vote?
Persons who are positive for COVID, we are asking those persons who are in home isolation to please stay at home. Persons who are obviously in isolation at the Harrison Point facility or any other facility, those persons are required to stay in those facilities. We understand that voting is the cornerstone of our democracy. However, we are still in a pandemic, and those persons are highly infectious. And we wouldn't want those persons to go out to a polling station where we know that we have all cadres of Barbadians there. We have the old, we have the infirmed, we have the young and the strong, we have those with medical conditions and so on. So we still want to be safe, and we are asking persons who know that if they're feeling ill, please stay at home. If you know you have a confirmed diagnosis for COVID and you're in isolation, that is what isolation is. You stay put. Thank you very much.
So if you're positive, you don't vote this election?
That is quite correct. If you're positive, you stay at home. You're looking surprised. If you are ill in the hospital, you stay in the hospital. Remember that the Harrison Point facility, as well as the other facility, which is Sun Bay Hotel, which is being used for isolation, those are extensions of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. They are hospital facilities, and home isolation is not supervised by the government in the fact that we take over your home, but we do supervise those persons, and we do offer surveillance for those persons and so on. And we are dealing with a highly infectious disease. If persons, let me just say this, if at the point in time we have protocols in place for if someone turns up and they have signs and symptoms of COVID, we have protocols in place for that, because obviously there are some persons who may feel ill or may not recognize that they're ill or may be asymptomatic. At the polling stations, we do have protocols in place for that. But we are asking Barbadians, please, if you know you are ill, if you know you are infectious, please do not come out and share that infection with others.
Good morning, Mrs. Taylor. Barry Allen here from the Nation newspaper. Happy New Year to everyone. Ms. Taylor, one thing we've learned in the last year with COVID-19 is that protocols create bottlenecks. The question I have to ask is, I'm not sure if we have the physical space to assist at every polling station, but have any provisions been put in place for the elderly in case bottlenecks do arise at polling stations? We know that over the last year, Barbadians complained bitterly about how elderly people were treated, forced to stand up in long lines to do basic things like even supermarket shopping. When the elderly turn up to vote and there is a bottleneck, any provisions made for them to be seated or to be made comfortable?
Yes. What we do at every general election is that we fast track, if you will, all the persons. We bring them to the top of the line. Sometimes we create a separate lane for them so that we get them in ahead of the strong ones. So that will be conveyed to our election workers during the training. We did this in the by-election, and we will do it in the general election, we will fast track the elderly.
Thank you. And a quick follow-up question, maybe one of the attorneys that is a commissioner might be able to help with this question. Is there any, well, Dr. George has said that we are living in COVID times and we're going to have to go forward living in a COVID-19 environment. So my goes back to my colleague's question before. Does our legislation allow any type of voting, or can it allow any type of voting apart from in-person voting? Is that something that we can expect to see in our environment in the years to come? Can we do that?
You know, Barry, is it Barry?
Yes, it is.
Barry, you know, one of the things is that I always encourage the members of the commission to be commissioners rather than lawyers. Because, you know, they say that he who advises himself has a fool for a client. But in answer to your question, I will let, Hal, do you want to take this one?
Can you repeat the question properly? I missed a little piece of the first.
Right, morning, Hal. The question is, does our legislation as it stands now allow for anything but in-person voting? The question goes back to what my colleague asked about if someone is positive, will they be able to vote? And Mr. Chapman made it clear they would not. So now I'm asking, and we are going to be living in a COVID-19 environment going forward for all intents and purposes now.
No, the vote, the casting of a vote. The casting of a vote is a very personal thing, except in those instances where a presiding officer on his discretion allows a person who's accompanying a person with some incapacity of some sort to cast a vote for him. And other than that, but a certain declaration has to be made and all of that. There's some administrative procedures to go through to even make that possible. But our legislation does not contemplate some what you call less than in-person voting. It's very straightforward on that regard, in my view. I see no indication that it was ever within the contemplation of the drafters to not the drafters, the legislators, to allow people to vote for other people.
Perhaps I can add something further to the answer to the question. We are at the EBC always looking at ways to improve, and with the advent of COVID-19, I am sure that there will be a time in the short future when we do sit down and discuss this matter of voting other than in-person voting and see where we can take that. Thank you.
Of course, Ms. Taylor. Of course, Ms. Taylor. I understand your assurance to the newsman, the press person, that something like that will come under consideration. But let us take this thing to its logical consequence. One of the main safeguards in the electoral process is to avoid fraud. And in my view, any process that would permit people to vote for others on a wider scale than is presently allowable is opening the door to fraud, especially in a technological age where fraud is such a ready problem with all kinds of things. So while you assured the questioner of the willingness to sit down and look at these things that may seem to be problems, that may present problems in this kind of environment, I would caution that you do not create any false sense of hope that something like that would be implemented by any administration in the future in Barbados, given the overriding objective of avoiding fraud in the electoral process. I see the chairman is smiling.
So no, so the press has just had a little insight as to what goes on at EBC meetings, proposals and objections and pros and cons and what have you. So that that basically that this is a discussion for an EBC meeting in the future. We'll take it from there. It's not all good.
Just following up on that, Mr. Keane. So Jamaica would have held elections and Jamaica made provision for persons who are positive. I understand not wanting persons to come out into the public domain. I understand not letting someone vote for someone. However, there are such things as mail-in votes. And then within, let's say Harrison Point, can Harrison Point have its own quote unquote polling station for persons who are positive, but not on ventilators? Because everybody who has tested positive isn't bedridden, sick. So to say that just having COVID means that you now have no say for the next 5 years, well, 3 to 5 years, depending on when the next election would be called, to me, that doesn't seem fair or just. Other jurisdictions in the region have conducted elections during COVID and they have made exemptions and provisions for positive persons.
Mr. Chapman, do you wish to further respond? I do appreciate that you explained well that in a general election, persons in the hospital are not allowed to, we do not make a provision for them to vote. And I can only repeat for Mr. Chapman that the COVID-19 facilities are extensions of the hospital. And Mr. Chapman, I'm going to let you conclude this because the emphasis here is on not spreading the COVID-19 disease.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. And I think it's something that we struggle with because there's at no point in time would you want to disenfranchise someone. It is, as the question implies, it is one of the fundamental rights of who we are as a democracy. However, we have to recognize, and I will repeat it, those isolation facilities are extensions of the QEH. They're not, and I wanted to frame it like that. They're not institutions in themselves. And I do not remember any time in the past where we provided, and I'm not part of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, but I'm just speaking from memory, where provision was made for persons who are in the hospital to vote. So that's basically the part of it. And a lot of those persons who would have been the QEH and so on, a lot of those persons are not infectious. They would have been there recovering from heart disease, maybe trauma, some sort of trauma or something of that sort. What we have now is a disease that is highly infectious. We have just been told by the chief medical officer not too long ago that we have Omicron here in Barbados. And we know that Omicron it is even more infectious than Delta. So we have to be able to balance those two. We have to be able to err on the side of continuity of the country as much as possible. I recognize, as I said, it is a tough pill to swallow. It's a tough pill to swallow for anyone who wants to be a part of this process. But we have to be our brother's keeper. We have to ensure that something that is highly infectious, while you may be out, may go out and exercise your democratic right, you don't want to do so at the peril of the same little old lady that we spoke of, that the question was asked of the provisions we are making for, or maybe someone who came out to vote and have a heart condition who have uncontrolled diabetes or something of that sort and put their lives in danger. I think that we want to be able to frame it like that so that we recognize that this is a significant risk. Now, I'm not saying that people who have COVID cannot vote. I'm sure that at some point in time, someone will turn up who did not know that they have COVID or did not recognize that they have symptoms, and they will probably turn up, and they will turn up at the polling stations. And for that reason, we have made special provisions for, we have put protocols in place to ensure that if we do come across someone like that, that person is processed quickly, and that person is dealt with in a way that reduces risk to everyone else at the polling station. Thank you so much.
Madam CEO, I want to suggest that the question by the young lady, I don't remember her name, Luke News, contains an element of law which should go beyond Mr. Chapman. The chairman made a very, very telling point earlier, when Mr. Aline, I believe it was, asked one of the lawyers to comment on something, that he always cautions the lawyers on the commission not to behave like lawyers. And he quoted that famous aphorism that a lawyer who has himself a client, he said a fool, but he was probably being a little less, little more euphemistic, says an ass for a client. That's the usual thing. What I consider here is that Mr. Chapman is being asked to give an opinion on something which has a legal element attached to it, a strong legal element, and that it would be a better position to defer any opinion on this until the legal advisor to the commission expresses an opinion on it. I have been in the electoral process hands-on as a returning officer on a few occasions. And yes, we're speaking about COVID, but COVID has brought new things with it, which were heretofore, not taken into consideration in our laws. And I have seen on many occasions people who could barely hold their head up being brought out of places like district hospitals and other infirmaries to go to vote. So that the question by the young lady is a very relevant question, because if somebody is at, as she pointed out, Harrison, there may be some means of reaching out, having that person put an X on put a mark on a ballot. So I think it goes much further than just passing off a definitive statement that it cannot be done because of this and because of that. I believe that is certainly outside Mr. Chapman's competence, because it has an impact on law. And I think it would be wiser to have an opinion on this, so that the position of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission can be based on a solid legal opinion rather than that of Mr. Chapman. And Mr. Chapman would know this is no aspersion on his competence. His competence is that as a health official, not a lawyer. And this thing does have a legal element attached to it. That's my advice in this regard.
Thank you. I have a question for the chairman, Mr. Haynes. In the last 72 hours or so, there has been a significant amount of public discourse regarding not just the publishing of the voters list, but the way in which the voters list was published, that being online, and a copy, as I'm sure you know by now, was circulated all across the country, maybe all across the world. I would like to explain to Barbadians the thinking of the Electoral and Bodies Commission in terms of how this was done and how it released this list. We know that by law, the list is always published. It was never published in this way before. And that is what a lot of the public discourse has been about in the last 72 hours. Maybe either you or Ms. Taylor could appease the public. And a lot of them have fears that this is their personal data that has been put across the world, across the internet. And they consider their names, date of birth, addresses to be personal data that is now accessible by almost anyone, really.
Barry, what I can tell you is that, as you know, the list has always been published before digital publishing came to the fore. We would publish in the it was the law library, the public library. And where else, Mrs. Taylor? The public library and
at the office and at the department's office.
And the department.
And before that, Mr. Haynes, even in rum shops.
Even in rum shops. And the list always contained the same information. And by the amendment to the Representation of the People Act, Act number 25 of 2020, we are obligated to publish the list now electronically so that more people can have access to it. Truth be told, who goes in the public library? The public library was once a grand building, and it's now a building next to Independence Square. The doors are what, 2 by 4 a door. I mean, who goes in the public library? Who has the time to come to the electoral office? So we in keeping with the times, we move forward electronically. The issue was, and this list was the electronic publishing of the list is, I wouldn't want to say it, this election was not the first time. We published the list electronically in January of this year. So there you have it. And then we are obliged to do so by statute. I heard somebody but the births of persons in Barbados is not really anything that is private. Nor are the ID numbers. Those are not private matters. Those have always been published. What is happening now is available to more and more people. I understand, and this ties in with what the lady from Luke News was asking. At all stages of life, we have to balance interests. Interests for the good, for the many, against the interests of the few. What I understood Mr. Chapman to be saying was, look, and Mrs. Taylor and yourself, Hal, was that yes, it's a legal issue, but we are not saying that the law says that people with COVID cannot vote. I don't know what Mr. Chapman and Mrs. Taylor were saying, as I understand it. We are asking people not to come out to vote for the benefit of for the many, for the benefit of the elderly. That is what we are asking. There's no decree saying that they cannot vote. Likewise, for the electoral list, again, you mentioned it earlier, Hal, fraud. As it is now, what we have done a compromise whereby people can obtain their own information on the list. But this does not, so if they want to go to the public library, they can see the entire list. Of course, the political parties have the entire list as they normally do at every election. But there may be someone who knows someone who is on the list who is overseas and that person died, overseas or passed away overseas and can come forward and say, this person is no longer with us. And we can carry out our checks and processes to see. So at the end of the day, we have to balance, as you said earlier, we have to balance the need to have a clean electoral list to ensure that there's no fraud and against certain things. And as usual, you come down in favor of the option that reduces the mischief. That's how I see it. Ramon, do you have anything to add to that?
Not at all. I think your point as to balance is the correct one. And there are issues that we have to look at it in terms of individual rights against rights of the entire society. There's no easy answer. Time is an issue in relation to this election, yes. And it is balancing those interests and doing the best in the circumstances that we've been given.
Corey, would you like to add anything?
I don't really have much more to add. I agree with all of the sentiments thus far. In any given situation, and certainly COVID is a new situation, there's considerations for balance and considerations that we have to take on board that we would not have had to do in the past. And I think that the members of the media and certainly the members of the public can be assured that the Commission will do all that it can and take all that it can into consideration to ensure that the election goes well and that we still maintain all of the public health protocols that we need to.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Good morning, Brianne Phillips, ABC News. Ms. Taylor, you would have mentioned that you would have a separate team dealing with COVID matters. How big is that team?
Oh, the team is quite big. We are fine-tuning the numbers, but we will have persons doing the temperature checks, persons doing the hand sanitizing, persons sanitizing the booth in the polling station after voters have cast their votes, and persons policing the line to ensure that persons are maintaining the distance. We are going to have in the facility of 541 polling stations, and we're going to have those persons at each polling station. That will give you some indication of the size of the COVID-19 team we will be deploying.
Good morning. Just a follow-up question on that. Mr. Chapman, you would have said that provision will be made if persons are feeling symptomatic on the day. Is this a situation where they will be given a rapid test on site? How, in addition to when they do the temperature check, if you check a temperature and it's a high temperature, will that person then be rapid tested, or will that person be turned away from the polling station?
Once you're at the polling, just remember, I will take counsel from Hal and let you know that I am not a lawyer. Once persons are in the line and they're there to vote, if you present with anything that looks like COVID, if you have a temperature, anything of that sort, you will not be turned away from voting. Let me just make that absolutely clear. The protocols say that you will not, and this is from a health perspective, okay? The protocols do not make provision for turning anyone away. There will not be any testing sites, any testing done at the stations either. What will happen is that persons will come into the line, and when they will be physically distanced as per the protocols. As they enter the area where the returning officers and the election clerks, I'm not familiar with all the names of the personnel, but as they enter the area where they're going to vote, their temperature will be taken. If at that point in time, the temperature is elevated, then they are still allowed to vote. you will have then the persons in the voting area will, by protocol, all have on their masks and face shields and so on. Once that person has voted, and this will be on continuously. Let me just say that this is part of the protocol. Once that person has voted, then there will be complete sanitization of the area where the person is. Now, let me say this. This is not, and we have to look at parallels when we look at processes and so on. There are many persons in Barbados now who have COVID, excuse me, who have COVID and don't know that they have COVID. And they go to the supermarket every day and we stand in long lines and we go up to the supermarket counter with our groceries, we physically distance, and we put our groceries on the table, on the conveyor belts. We pay for them and we go. Okay? The whole, and their temperature checked before they go into the supermarket and their hands sanitized. So the process is basically akin to that. However, the difference is if we recognize that you do have a temperature, the first step in the process is to pull you one side and take the temperature again, because you recognize that sometimes you can have an elevated temperature from just walking through the sun, because the thermometer takes surface temperature of the skin. So we pull you one side, we let you stay in a little area for a couple minutes so that your temperature will normalize. If your temperature is still elevated, then you go straight in. We allow you to do your voting. We allow you to move along quickly so as to reduce risk to anyone else. So the process is designed in such a way not to hinder the voting process. We know that sometimes you can go to the polling stations and the line may be a little long. So you don't want to have procedures in place that do not add value to the reduction of risk, but holds up the process. So we want to be able to reduce risk, but yet allow people to vote and vote as quickly as the process would allow. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, please. Just a follow-up question for Ms. Taylor. With respect to, in usual times, it's from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. for voting, and we tend to have the count during the night. With all these provisions in place and how many persons will be there, the social distancing, do you expect that our returning result will come the next day this year? And is there any cutoff point for persons in the line? I know in the past, once you're in the line by 6 p.m., you're allowed to be there. Suppose there are persons there to be processed all down to, let's say, 10 p.m.
As long as persons are in the line by 6 o'clock, they will be allowed to vote. So if it takes them down till 10, that will dictate the time that we are able to give the election results. I would have said a little earlier, and I would like to repeat, we are encouraging, we can do more than encourage persons to come out to vote during the middle of the day, rather than all coming in the morning or all coming close to 6 o'clock. Those persons who do not have to work, we're asking you to allow those persons who want to vote in the morning before they go to work to use the morning hours. Those persons who want to vote after work to use the evening hours. Please, if you are not working, please come between 10 and 3 if you can. As long as you can. That's the most we can do. Encourage persons to come during the middle hours when we usually have a little quiet time, so that we do not end up with too many people in the line at 6 o'clock. However, let me repeat, as long as persons are on the line by 6 o'clock, they will be allowed to vote regardless of what time it takes to process them.
And Mrs. Taylor, as discussed at the meeting with the political parties yesterday, I am asking, the EBC is asking employers to allow their employees that little extra time during the lunch hour to vote as well, since we are asking people to come out, not in the to come out a cross section during the day, for employers to be lenient in these COVID times And if, you know, someone may be working in St. Michael, they may have to vote in St. James. Let them take the time of vote so as to minimize the COVID-19 risk. It may take an hour and a half, it may take 2 hours, so be it. It's only one day in the year. So that in order for us to have a steady flow throughout the day, rather than a bunching up, we are asking people to come out, as you said before, those who are not not working on that particular day, come during the lunchtime or be after the crowd. Want to vote during the middle of the day as well, so as to avoid that risk and to reduce this of COVID-19, as Mr. Chapman has said.
Mr. Haynes, during Christmas time, a lot of businesses, what they do is they ask employees to provide the half day that they want for shopping. So they have a roster of persons who are working in the business and they have what day is yours, which half day you will be out. What about even asking employers to maybe put a roster in place for that day and having persons go off at 8 p.m. These 4 clients go off at 6 p.m., at 2 p.m., so that it's not just lunch hour, because almost everybody takes their lunch hour around the same time. So why not ask businesses to create a roster for the day and allow maybe 10 employees or 20 employees, depending on the size, to go and vote at particular times?
But that's a very good suggestion. I thank you for it. And the employers that can afford that, we would ask them to put those measures in place.
Are there any further questions from the media, Chair? If not, we can wrap up.
Any further questions? Anyone?
Just one more thing with regards to the list, and I know Hal would have said that we can also take guidance from somebody, a legal advisor, after this. But right now, I know you're weighing the good against the bad, the majority versus the minority. I understand those scales. However, when we talk fraud, at present, you're talking fraud locally, as opposed to talking fraud globally. So right now, the biggest situation or the biggest scare that people have is the fact that those are your 2 verification points for a lot of the financial institutions in Barbados. If I call right now and I say, hi, I'm having a problem with my card, it's not going through, the bank is going to ask me, what's your national registration number? I'm going to say that. They're going to ask me, what's my address or what was my first address? And I'm going to have that. That information is now out there for somebody who's not even local. So before, it was just looking at locals who are mischievous, who could go into the library, who could go into the rum shop and do these things. But now it's out there on a grander scale in terms of globally. I just wanted to put that out there when we're weighing in terms of the fraud.
Thank you.
No more questions from me.
Thank you. No, I understand your point. That's a very good point. And it obviously has to go in the balance.
Okay, Chair, if there are no further questions, thank you. We can wrap up. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning. Of course, elections and the commission will keep the press updated today, which is our next day. And as Mr. Brown said earlier, we are doing your training starts at what time, Ian?
It has actually started. We started at 10.
And it will continue now until about 6 this afternoon or so?
No, hopefully not, Chair. Probably around 4:30. Yeah, we are attempting to go through the entire process of the elections.
Right, yeah. Correct. And we have things to do tomorrow. So we will keep the press informed, and the press, and as usual, we will be available to the press. And as long as Mrs. Taylor has an extra second or two, I have no doubt that she will make herself available to the press as well.
Indeed, I will.
Thanks everyone for coming this morning, and in particular, Mr. Chapman, we know you are all over the place. Thank you for your time this morning. I didn't say you were like Punka, but you're all over the place. Yes, right.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.